Good evening and welcome. Thank you for being here. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on, because this developing story will unfold over multiple installments, and you don't want to miss the releases as new material is reviewed. Here's what we know tonight. A man with a front row seat to a royal saga, Andrew Parker Bowles, former husband of Camilla, breaks a 3-decade silence with a statement that challenges the accepted love story narrative around King Charles III and Queen Camilla. In his account, ambition outruns affection, public relations outruns private duty, and a family pays the price. The palace, according to insiders, is preparing guidance. Crisis professionals are aligning messaging. The timeline is tight, the questions are direct, and the implications reach from vintage scandals to the present. First, the frame. The account presented tonight is a dramatized retelling of claims circulating in Royal Watch circles and in one recent program transcript. It reflects assertions attributed to the speaker and comments reported by sources. It is not a judicial finding. Our aim is to lay out the moving parts clearly: who said what when the pressure points hit, and how the pieces may connect. We will separate allegation from verification and flag what remains disputed. The first pressure point is motive. According to the speaker, the breakdown of his marriage was not a simple matter of romance rekindled. It was strategy. He argues that the crown, its promise, its proximity, reshaped priorities inside his household. That is the claim. On the record, he positions himself not as a wounded ex, but as a corrective voice asking to revise the official timeline. On the other side of the ledger, supporters of the current queen describe a decades-long partnership, weathering public hostility and private tragedy, and they reject the idea of calculation. Those counterpoints will be explored as this series continues. Tonight's update adds a second pressure point: stakes. If the public recalibrates how the Charles-Camilla relationship is perceived, reputational capital moves. Approval curves can bend. In the worst case, institutional trust softens at the edges. That is why, according to people familiar with standard practice, you can expect rapid response briefings, carefully phrased statements, and selective visibility by senior figures. None of that proves or disproves the claims. It shows how seriously the narrative battlefield is treated. Let's map the players at the center of tonight's report. Camilla, presented here as the engine of events, framed by critics as a strategist, by supporters as a survivor of scrutiny. Andrew Parker Bowles, the narrator of the allegations, casting himself as protector of his children and custodian of a truer record. Charles, the pivotal constant, romantic lead to some, enabling actor to others. Diana, the counterweight, invoked as moral ballast and the source of a different standard of conduct. Their children, William, Tom, and Laura, are the human cost in this telling, the ones who carried the public storm while adults negotiated the private weather. We now come to the line that punctures the calm. Our marriage was ignited from the inside. In tonight's program material, that sentence lands as a thunderclap because it flips the script. The familiar story centers on outside interference. This version centers on interior choices. It also adds a charge. That image, crafting, managed photographs, managed quotes, managed silences, was not incidental, but instrumental. We will test that charge against dates and documents as we proceed. At this hour, we can outline a lean chronology to keep the facts straight. Early, 1,970 seconds. An intense early relationship between Camilla and Charles is well documented in open sources. 1,973. Camilla marries Andrew. Late 1,980 seconds. Contact between Camilla and Charles re-intensifies. 1,993. The Camillagate tapes detonate into the public domain, humiliating families on both sides. 1,995. Divorce finalizes. 2005. Charles and Camilla marry. Those dates are not controversial. What is contested is the interpretation, whether the path from social whirl to chapel aisle was a long inevitability or a long calculation. That debate is the spine of this story. There is also a procedural subplot playing out in the margins. Who shapes the narrative when private conduct becomes public crisis? The program transcript introduces a polished intermediary, an archetypal crisis consultant, arriving with smooth language and implied incentives. The pitch is familiar. Say less, suffer less, accept protection, avoid escalation. The alleged reply is firm. Silence is not an option. If accurate, that exchange signals a decision point. Once a principal decides to speak without settlement, containment gets harder, and the audience, meaning the public, becomes the jury. Here is tonight's first reveal, and it comes with caveats. The source material frames a set of documents as turning keys, a communications brief from the early 1990 seconds, a handwritten note of contrition tied to a children's confrontation, and a court record from the mid-1990 seconds. We have not authenticated those materials. Their contents, as described, would support a portrait of careful image management during a period of domestic fracture. If they exist and are verified, they will clarify intent and sequence. If they do not, they underscore the durability of rumor in royal storytelling. Either way, the stakes are high enough to justify careful scrutiny. A word on tone. This program will not luxuriate in metaphor or melodrama. We will proceed with plain sentences, short paragraphs, and verified milestones. Where testimony diverges, we will mark it. Where feelings run hot, we will keep the focus on actions, dates, and consequences. That approach does not diminish the pain behind the claims. It protects the audience from being steered by mood instead of evidence. Before we close tonight's installment, a note about the human perimeter. The children in this narrative were minors when many of the hardest moments hit. Any reenactment or retelling will avoid sensationalizing their distress. That is a standard we hold, and we ask viewers to hold it with us when discussing this story. You can be sharp on institutions and careful with individuals at the same time. Here is where we stand as we hand off to the next chapter. One principal has gone on the record with a stark line about how a marriage failed. The other principals have not answered those specifics in this venue. The palace, if it responds at all, will respond carefully. The archive will help or hurt the competing versions, depending on what it shows, and the public, as ever with royal narratives, will decide what to believe long before any definitive evidence emerges. If you found tonight's breakdown useful, tap subscribe and leave a comment with one question you want answered. Do you view this as a love that endured or a plan that succeeded? Your questions will guide what we probe next, including the timeline of calls, the role of crisis communications, and the contested moments around 1993. The next installment takes us back to the late 1970 seconds and 1980 seconds, where the seeds of today's crisis were planted and the first fractures, quiet at first, began to show. Here's what moves the story forward tonight. We rewind to the years when small choices hardened into a pattern. We track a social set, a handful of houses, a recurring guest list. We mark the moments when courtesy became cover. The record is clear on certain points. An early bond between Camilla and Charles in the 1970 seconds. A 1973 wedding linking Camilla to Andrew Parker Bowles. Children arrive Tom, then Laura. The public facade reads country life and service. The private calendar, in this account, tilts elsewhere. Friends from that circle describe a light that followed Camilla into any room. The camera liked her. The hosts did too. That is not a crime. It is context. The allegation is narrower. That proximity to the prince was managed, not incidental. That diaries were shaped around opportunities. That a future role was treated as destiny, then as a plan. A name re-enters. Princess Anne. Long-standing ties with Andrew. A clear eye in a fog of charm. In this retelling, she is the first insider to speak bluntly to him. She calls what she sees strategy. She urges him to protect the children before the headlines do the damage. He hears her. He hesitates. That hesitation will cost him. We also introduce a dynamic that repeats through this story. Public tenderness, private distance, a photo call with a daughter at a charity event, smiles for the line of lenses, then the handoff to a sitter. Then, the unhurried conversation with a journalist who can place a paragraph in the weekend editions. None of this proves a design. It does, however, fit the claim that image building was not an afterthought. Tonight we open the first envelope. Label it A. It is described as a briefing note from a communications advisor in the late 1980 seconds. The language, as quoted by the source, is clinical. Position as steadfast confidant. Reduce volatility. Build resilience narrative. If genuine, it confirms a template familiar to crisis teams. Anchor the principle. Normalize the presence. Seed sympathetic profiles. We have not authenticated the document. We are reporting how it is presented by those advancing this account. The children are not footnotes. They are the line that keeps this from becoming a costume piece. Tom is portrayed as the one who reads what adults hope he won't. Laura is the one who waits for a mother who does not arrive. Their father says the house changed. Tone, quieter, harder, a little colder. He calls it the sound of a plan you are not a part of. Your mother is the cause of my mother's misery. That sentence belongs to an 1-year-old William in this narrative. After Camillagate blows into the open in 1993, he apologizes later. He is a child. He should not have been there, emotionally or physically. But he was. because the adults were already beyond prevention. That confrontation is not the point. The correction is. Diana kneels, steadies her son, and directs empathy toward Laura. That move, clear, simple, will echo. We pivot to Andrew's timeline. He is a cavalry officer with a straight back and a high threshold for embarrassment. He decides that embarrassment has limits. He keeps the house together as best he can. He tells friends it is a phase. He tells himself the same. In this script, denial buys the other side time. It also buys the narrative another year. A second envelope is flagged for later. Call it B. It contains a handwritten note that viewers of a certain age could identify without a signature. The existence of a letter is not in dispute. The content, as summarized here, frames children as innocent parties and urges adults to pull them out of the blast zone. We will return to it when we reach the hinge year. There is a practical dimension that often gets missed when stories focus on romance and betrayal. Diaries, gate lists, car allocations, press rotations. The material in play tonight suggests that small logistics did large work. A seat at a table, a place on a guest list, a phone call returned promptly instead of tomorrow. No single act proves design, but if you line them up on a wall calendar, you see a slope. We ask a basic question. What did Andrew know? And when did he know it? In his new account, he knew enough in the late 1980 seconds to be worried, not enough to act. He says he believed in private resolution. He says he thought the house would heal if pressure dropped. There is no sign the pressure dropped. The opposite happened. Visibility increased. So did speculation. That is how you reach 1993. Before we get there, one more human scene. A teenage boy finds letters he should not have found. He confronts his mother and hears a word that will scar him: fate. He learns that there is a version of love that treats people as placeholders. Later he will say that is the day he stopped being a child. We are not adjudicating that memory. We are reporting that it sits at the center of this testimony. What about Charles in these years? In this telling, he is both constant and variable. Constant in his importance, variable in his presence. He is the gravity around which the others orbit. He is also the shield others lift to justify difficult choices. Whether he drove events or drifted with them is a question we will return to. It matters less for mood than for accountability. A final note on why this era matters. Narratives harden. Files close. People forget the details and keep the summary. If the summary is wrong, you carry a small error for decades. If Andrew is right, the small error is this. The great romance was not only great, it was also managed. If he is wrong, then this is the well-worn pattern of grievance dressed as revelation. The documents, if they can be tested, will decide. Here is what happened when the phones started ringing. A private storm crossed the threshold and picked up a name, Camilla Gate. A tape of intimate calls surfaced, then spread. Editors huddled, lawyers hovered, switchboards jammed. People who had never cared about court circulars suddenly had opinions about duty, vows, and truth. The effect was immediate. Headlines led with shock, phone-ins filled with anger. The monarchy took a reputational hit. The families took the emotional one. In this account, the fallout did not land evenly. Diana absorbed the public pity and the private pain. Charles carried the glare. Camilla became a symbol. And inside a quieter house, Andrew tried to keep two teenagers from drowning in noise they did not create. Crisis practice looks the same in most institutions. Identify the line, hold it, reduce oxygen. That playbook activated. Spokespeople used careful verbs. Courtiers trimmed schedules. Aides advised limited visibility and neutral backdrops. None of that reached the kitchen tables where the children ate. The kitchen tables are where the damage accumulates. The program material places a vivid scene on a charity night. Two streams cross in a side corridor. 11-year-old William sees Laura and bursts. His words are sharp. He is a child in shock, not a politician choosing phrasing. The moment stings. It is also corrected. Quickly and cleanly. Diana intervenes, steadies her son, and directs empathy toward the other child. Later, William apologizes to Laura. That second part matters. It places a pin in the map labeled decency. We open envelope B tonight. It is presented as a handwritten note from Diana to Andrew, sent after that incident. The language, as summarized by this source, is simple and adult. The children are innocent. The parents must shield them. A meeting would help. We have not authenticated the paper. We can report that the idea fits the person many remember. Direct, protective, and unafraid to step outside protocol when children were involved. That meeting is described in practical detail. A table, tea, no entourage. Two people comparing notes from opposite sides of the same storm. She offers an apology for a boy's outburst and a framework for moving forward. Keep the children out of the blast zone. Stop pretending time will fix what decisions continue to break. Choose clarity over erosion. Andrew says he left with a task instead of a grievance. That is the hinge. It will turn soon. Meanwhile, the media cycle did what it does. It searched for clean narratives. Great romance versus great betrayal. Destiny versus design. The truth was messier. The transcript's claim is that public images were curated with skill while private bonds were fraying by the week. It also claims that an experienced fixer attempted a quiet deal. Stay silent. Accept protection. Let the years sand the edges off the past. The alleged answer was no. If that is accurate, it explains why the volume stayed high. We track the toll in small domestic moments. A daughter waits at a window and gets a gift instead of a hug. A son finds letters that shift how he sees his mother. Their father measures the house in silences. None of those images prove any single allegation. Together, they define the atmosphere that made Camillagate feel less like an isolated explosion and more like the sound of a structure giving way. There is also the question of timelines. People often act as if the scandal arrived overnight. It did not. It accumulated. That is why the year 1993 bites so hard in this telling. It is the point when speculation becomes content, when private adjectives turn into public nouns, when a marriage's failure becomes a national storyline. In that pressure, people either retreat or clarify. Andrew chose to clarify. Not in a press conference, in a living room. We report that he confronted Camilla with plain questions. What do you want? What is the plan? Where do the children fit? The answer he recalls is the line that anchors this entire account. You were a means to an end. That sentence is the moment he describes as the end of denial. It is also the moment he says he understood that protecting his children required action, not endurance. Where is Charles in this frame? Largely off camera, yet central. He does not have to speak to tilt the room. His existence as heir does that for him. In the transcript's logic, those around him built strategies to stabilize his narrative. Those strategies had consequences for people who were not in the room when they were written. We close tonight by marking what changed because of this phase. The public learned the vocabulary of leaks, taps, and transcripts. The palace learned new rhythms of crisis management. The families learned that once a story leaves a house, it rarely returns intact. Most of all, Andrew learned that waiting would not deliver safety for Tom and Laura. The next move would be decisive. It would be legal, and it would be quiet. Here is where the confrontation leaves the living room and enters the paperwork. After a hard sentence, you were a means to an end. The house stops pretending. Diaries are compared. Counsel is consulted. Priorities are ranked. The stated priority is narrow and direct. Protect the children. The first step is procedural. Andrew engages a solicitor experienced in family matters involving public figures. The instruction is simple. Limit exposure. Minimize spectacle. Keep the focus on welfare. The advice comes back in 3 lines. Document care patterns. Stabilize schooling. Reduce contact points that turn into headlines. None of this is theatrical. It is deliberate. A different playbook activates elsewhere. Communications advisors assess risk and design calm. The guidance is predictable. Neutral clothing, neutral tones, neutral settings. No public sparring. No reactive statements. If possible, let the calendar do the work. That counsel is sound in ordinary disputes. This is not ordinary. There is a tape in the national memory and a narrative on every front page. Silence does not always equal safety when minors are involved. We follow the administrative trail. Intake interviews, child impact assessments, timotables with pickups and drop-offs that look dull until you understand that dull is the goal. Alongside that, a parallel effort begins. Reduce the heat around the teenagers. Teachers are briefed to watch for signs of pressure. Phones are managed. Invitations are filtered. In the program's reconstruction, Diana's note becomes a touchstone line. The children are innocent. And the operational question becomes how to make that sentence true in practice. There is also a diplomatic channel. Princess Anne is said to maintain contact with Andrew, offering a straight reading of palace mood and a straight warning about the cost of indecision. Her guidance does not take sides in the romance. It takes the children's side in the fallout. She is not a court. She is a compass. He chooses to use it. The legal filings take shape. They are not written for historians. They are written for a judge. They stress routine, responsibility, and continuity. They avoid accusation where it is not essential to the welfare case. That is a strategy with a purpose. Keep the courtroom from turning into a referendum on famous adults, and keep it centered on 2 young people who did not ask for any of this. We mark one quiet inflection point. A scheduled joint appearance is pulled. A separate drop-off replaces a shared doorway. A small change on paper becomes a large change in atmosphere. Tabloids get less to work with. The household gets more air. Insiders describe a last attempt at a private settlement. Broad discretion for public comment, in exchange for soft language and paperwork, and a general commitment to avoid media-facing conflict. The answer, as presented in this account, is consistent with the pattern we have tracked. No public bargaining over children. If correct, that choice sets the tone for the next phase. Courtrooms are often less dramatic than films suggest. This one, by design, is quiet. Statements are read. Schedules are confirmed. The children are heard, carefully and in age-appropriate ways. The transcript of this program places words in their mouths that are clear and restrained. A wish for predictability, for the parent who is most present, for an end to the daily noise. We cannot verify those quotes independently. We can say the court's task in such cases is to turn wishes and facts into orders that reduce harm. The outcome described is narrow and consequential. Andrew receives primary custody arrangements. The language is measured. The effect is not. For the teenagers, it means a home base that is not a staging ground for public narratives. For the adults, it means boundaries that must be respected, even when the outside world pushes for a story. We do not skip over the human cost. There are conversations that do not end well. There are holidays that do not feel like holidays. There is a period when a son's anger is a constant, and a daughter's silence is louder than any argument. The adults manage as best they can. The teenagers grow up in the middle of headlines they did not write. With formalities settled, the temperature drops. That is the point. There is movement toward a quieter life. School continues. Friendships normalize. Horses and routine take more space than newspapers. We are told Andrew remarries, and that the choice is calm, not spectacle. He does not tour talk shows. He chooses anonymity where possible. For a story that thrives on lights, that choice is a form of statement. Meanwhile, the other narrative does not pause. Charles and Camilla continue their path in public view, working through resistance and reintroductions. The country's mood shifts in slow degrees. Time sands edges. Strategic appearances are planned with care. There are charities to support, plaques to unveil, tours to complete. The lesson is institutional. Consistency can outlast outrage. One date on the public calendar matters for the arc we are tracking. April 2005. A civil ceremony, a blessing, a photograph on the steps. In the program's framing, Andrew is present, not as a prop, but as a sign that adulthood can be chosen over anger, that rules can be made and kept when the audience is large and opinions are louder. He does not deliver a speech. He does not need to. The image is enough. We have reached a plateau in the timeline. The crisis phase moves into the management phase. The story could end there if this were only a family's private history. It does not end because the public never fully lets go of the earlier scenes and because a later chapter reopens the file. A former spouse speaks with clarity after years of restraint. New claims circulate about motive and method. Old questions are asked with fresh energy. How much of a public story was shaped by private calculation? Who paid which prices? Who decided when and why? We will take those questions next. We will also address a thread raised in the title of the source program that has so far remained in the background: financial stewardship during crisis and the optics attached to it. As always, allegations will be marked as allegations, records as records, and the audience invited to look at both without noise. Sussex side-eye drama Danoi. Here is how the rebrand took hold. The years after the ceremony were not quiet, but they were consistent. Public duty filled the frame. Walkabouts, wreaths, ribbons, hospital corridors. A steady sequence of engagements rebuilt familiarity. Polling softened. Headlines cooled. The storyline shifted from scandal to service, then to stability. That is how institutional reputations recover: repetition, restraint, and time. We track 3 levers that moved public sentiment. First, visibility with purpose. Appearances were tied to causes that overperform with the British public: osteoporosis research, domestic violence support, literacy. Second, proximity to continuity. Standing near the monarch, then the heir, confers borrowed trust when the calendar is well planned. Third, contrast. By avoiding reactive comments and keeping language careful, the rebrand offered no fresh sparks to ignite old tinder. It did not erase the past. It diluted it. There is a technical piece to this. Reputation does not drift. It is steered. Schedules are curated. Audiences are targeted. Photographs are framed to tell the same story from 10 angles. None of that is sinister on its face. It is how institutions survive peaks and troughs. The question in this program is narrower. When the steering intersects with private harm, Where is the line? We return to the household that chose quiet. Routine became defense. The teenagers became adults. The father remarried and moved his life toward low horizons, fields, horses, family lunches. That could have been the last entry. It was not. Years later, a choice is made to speak, clearly and on the record. The claim is not about a single misstep. It is about design. It says the romance that withstood public fury also depended on private sacrifices that should be acknowledged, not erased. Tonight we open the last envelope. Label it C. It is described as a confidential memo linked to crisis operations in the early 1990 seconds and to budget oversight during reputational repair in the years that followed. We have not authenticated it. We report its themes as summarized by sources who advance this account. 3 lines matter. Stabilize principal narrative by consolidating sympathetic profiles. Mitigate legal and tabloid exposure through selective cooperation. Resource allocation. Authorized for sustained media management. This is dry. Administrative language. If genuine, it indicates a sustained communications posture rather than a single weekend of firefighting. Here is where money and optics enter. Viewers asked for clarity on the title's reference to a financial angle. We will be precise. Institutions facing rolling crises retain counsel, research, placement, and training. Those services cost money. The program material suggests, without proving, that significant sums were directed to reputation repair during and after the period of private fracture. It does not allege wrongdoing. It raises the optics problem. Who paid? What lines of budget? What guardrails on vendor scope? When the public is told, no comment, but sees a warm profile on Sunday and a gentle feature on Tuesday, it notices patterns. Patterns raise questions. Experts we consulted for context outline standard practice. Crisis lines are funded from communications budgets, not from personal accounts. Retainers are set quarterly. Lines of effort include media monitoring, brief drafting, placement strategy, and sentiment analysis. None of that proves manipulation. It proves planning. The ethical line is crossed only if falsehoods are planted or public funds are misused for personal protection. We do not assert that here. We note that the optics are delicate when private conduct creates public costs. The account from Andrew frames the picture differently. He does not dwell on invoices or line items. He returns to outcomes. He says children absorbed the pressure that planning moved away from principles. He says a narrative of steadfast love overshadowed a reality of steady withdrawal from family life. He says he accepted silence while his children rebuilt themselves. Then he says the file should reflect that cost. Agree or disagree with his conclusion, the logic is clear. What about the palace response in the present? It follows the playbook we have charted before. Acknowledge complexity, avoid specifics, emphasize service. The absence of rebuttal is not an admission. It is risk management. The institution's goal is continuity, not catharsis. It will take the discomfort of a few high-traffic news cycles over the danger of adding oxygen to a contested account. We should test one hard claim that sits at the center of this narrative, that personal ambition eclipsed parental duty. The only direct evidence in the transcript is testimony and recollection. The rest is inference from timing, appearances, and the language of communications planning. Reasonable people will land in different places. Some will see adult agency constrained by a rigid court and a ravenous press. Others will see choices that prioritized a long game over immediate obligations. Our task is to separate what is documented from what is asserted and make both visible. There is also a paradox we cannot ignore. The same discipline that rebuilt a public image, measured language, unflustered demeanor, refusal to spar, also makes it difficult to challenge allegations later. Silence wears two faces. It lowers heat. It invites projection. That is how you arrive at the current moment. A calm exterior, a fresh round of claims, and an audience that remembers just enough of the old storm to be engaged. Let's mark the human perimeter again. In this retelling, William's adulthood is defined by steadiness, Catherine's by duty carried through illness and scrutiny, Tom and Laura's by private competence, far from podiums. None of them authored the original collision. All of them live with its history. That context matters as new arguments flare online. Targets are institutions. Care is for individuals. We close by noting what has changed since the first sentence in this series. Charles did not dissolve our marriage. The claim fractured the calm. It didn't collapse it. The institution moves on a long timeline. The audience moves on a daily one. Between those speeds sits a question that this program leaves with you. When a public story is built, who gets to sign off on the parts of it that were paid for in private? Here is what we will do next if you want us to continue. We will diagram the intersecting timelines, media moments, legal milestones, and family events. We will bring in outside experts on crisis communications to parse what is standard and what would be extraordinary. We will flag contested points and invite responses, and we will keep sentences clean, sources separate, and feelings acknowledged without letting them do the reasoning. Thank you for watching and for engaging respectfully in the comments. If you value clear timelines, careful sourcing, and room for your own judgment, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this episode with one person who follows royal news. Tell us the single question you want answered next: budget oversight, document authentication, or the ethics of institutional silence, and we'll prioritize it in the upcoming report.